welcome to our guest here, as well, Professor David Joyner, as well as all the attendees. This is a DSI AI in Higher Education webinar series. And I am Jaydeep Srivastava. I'm a faculty member in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at the University of Minnesota, as well as with a joint appointment in the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And I'm one of the core faculty members of the DSI. And this is a AI in Higher Education webinar series, a monthly forum to explore generative AI in academia. So this is an ongoing theme that we keep visiting once a month. It's hosted by the Data Science Initiative at the University of Minnesota. For those of you who don't know, the DSI is an inclusive hub driving innovation dedicated to the communication, coordination, and amplification of the current data science and AI activities at the University of Minnesota. And this is a fairly broad university-wide activity, so it involves people from all different colleges that we have. Today's talk, we're fortunate to have Professor Joyner from Georgia Tech. His topic is generative AI, a problem for education that solves itself. And just a little bit about the logistics. The presentation is going to be about 40 to 45 minutes, and then that'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. And please post your questions via the chat feature, okay? And that'll be the speaker can see those questions, so they may be able to answer it themselves sometime in the talk, or in the end, I will go ahead and moderate some of the questions, okay? And the recording of this presentation is going to be available, all right? And before we move on, then let me just introduce Professor David Joyner. David is the Associate Dean of Off-Campus and Special Initiatives and Executive Director of Online Education at Georgia Tech's College of Computing, where he also holds the Zvi Galil PEACE Chair. His research focuses on online education and learning at scale, especially as they intersect with for-credit offerings at the graduate and undergrad levels. His emphasis is on designing learning experiences that leverage the opportunities of online learning to compensate for the loss of synchronous collocated class time. This includes leveraging AI for student support and assignment evaluation, facilitating student communities in large online classes, investigating strategies for maintainable and interactive presentation of online instructional material. He's also the chair of the steering committee for the ACM Learning at Scale, as well as the general chair for the 2019, 2020, and 2024 conferences. He has received several awards. It's a long list for his work in teaching online, including 2023 Georgia Tech Outstanding Professional Education Award, the 2022 College of Computing Outstanding Faculty Leadership Award, the 2019 USG Regents Teaching Excellence Award for Online Teaching, and further awards. And in fact, he was also named to the Georgia Tech Alumni Association 40 Under 40 in 2022. So we really are excited to bring together a community of people interested in this, and we welcome Professor Joyner to this to address us today. Thank you. So over to you, Professor David Joyner.
Thank you so much, Jaydeep. I feel like I owe you an apology for making you read all that. So I was just, if y'all saw me looking over to my left, or my left, your right, I don't know which one it is. I was scrolling through the attendee list and I'm enjoying seeing some people I recognize. So hi, Haley. I see a Michael Brown. I know like 3 Michael Browns who've been students of mine and TAs of mine. I don't know if you're one of those. That's a somewhat common name. But I see Princess, I see Steven, and I'm sure there's others I've scrolled past. Very nice. So it's fun to see names I recognize, including Haley. I don't think we've talked in like 15 years, so it's fun to see a name. I'm like, hey, I know her. So hi everybody. Welcome to this. Let me make this work. So like Jaydeep said, my name is David Joyner. I work at Georgia Tech. I mostly run our online MSCS program, where I teach a few classes, including a couple on AI. So I've kind of been drafted into this AI and education movement the past couple of years. since everything kind of exploded. Like Jadip said, I've got the chat open on my left and the Q&A open on my right, so feel free to send things along either place. I don't think I can actually send messages to all attendees, but I think I can see your messages if not. Um, but yeah, so I will get started. But feel free to send along questions as we go. If it's anything that it seems like it makes most sense in context, I'll answer right away. If not, I'll wait until the end to talk about things. Um, I like to start whenever I talk about AI in higher education with these two views, only because I've given some talks over the past several months where I discovered halfway through the talk that everyone I was talking to was expecting the other view, which is embarrassing to realize halfway through the talk. So I lead off with this now, which is there's this view that's of learning about AI. There's a lot of efforts nowadays with how important AI skills have gotten to teach students more about how to use AI in their everyday life, how AI intersects with the curriculum that they're learning, and everything like that. And there's also learning using AI. So using AI actually as a teaching skill, a teaching tool to teach other things. I'm going to talk a bit about both of them. I'm going to start with learning using AI. Because I think that's the one that's very relevant it's kind of general purpose relevant. It's relevant to all of us, no matter where we're teaching nowadays, for reasons that I will, well, get into right now. I like to start this with looking at not a metaphor, but a way of organizing thoughts about this that came from some folks at MIT that I keep coming back to it because I think it's useful for reframing how a lot of years of technological innovations have happened. And so I keep coming back to it in terms of reframing how things have happened. I should say, I want to make sure if anyone sends a message, I can see it. So I haven't seen any messages yet. So if you've sent them, then it's not coming through, and y'all can chat with Amanda and them to make sure they come through. I wanted to mention that. But the typology is adopted versus arrival technologies. Adopted technologies are these technologies that we as universities, as companies, as schools, as organizations, as whoever, go out and proactively adopt. We procure them, we install them, we tell all our students, hey, you have to use this as part of being at the school, being in this class. And then there are arrival technologies. Those are technologies that our employees, our students, our members, whoever our audience is, they begin to use independently of us. And we're forced to react to those things. So we can't just, cover our eyes and say we're going to pretend they don't have that new technology. We're just, we're going to keep doing things that we've always done. These are the things that force us to change. So other ways to think of this are that the adopted technologies are kind of opportunities. Arrival technologies tend to be things that we're forced to I won't say adopt or adapt to, because that sounds similar, but they were forced to adjust to based on their arrival. And I think these actually map pretty well to the adoption curve that we've seen from so many different places. Even among schools, there are schools that invest in and proactively adopt or develop, depending on the school, new technologies. So these are the schools that went out and would find things that would actually help their students to deliberately push out to everyone and have everyone use. And on the other end, there are schools that kind of react to students having access to these new technologies. And schools fall into these different areas for various different reasons, many of which are not by choice, but by necessity. But this kind of forces the way schools kind of play in these new areas. We saw this early on. So, we talk about AI in education, especially in the last 26 months, I guess now it is, almost to the day since ChatGPT kind of forced this all. Honestly, I guess 28. I can't do math. 27, 25, some number of months. But even before that, for many years, schools would go out and adopt some AI platforms that were of varying levels of sophistication. But these were things that schools very often would go out and proactively decide these are what we're going to use for our homework platform, what we're going to use for our instructional platform, and integrate them into their curriculum. And the arrival technologies tend to be things that are a bit more general purpose. These are the things that students they get access to when we find that they're using them in ways that we did not anticipate, and we have to adjust what we're doing with them. ChatGPT being the famous example, but nowadays all the kind of general purpose AI tools, I think, fall very squarely into this area that they aren't designed to be things that students can use as, tutoring systems or essay generating systems or whatever students are using them for, but they have that potential, and that's how students end up using these, and that's where we have to react, to adopt, to new developments. We can see this with lots of other technologies that have happened over the years. The internet was an example of back in the day we would have students go to the library and do some research on by finding books, going through the card catalog, finding those things, and then when students started to have the internet at home, it forced us to adapt to that different source they were going through to find their the material, and now it's become a first class learning object for what we do. And that kind of exemplifies what I actually see as a cycle between these two kind of areas, which is that when there's an arrival technology, when there's a technology that people are becoming more familiar with on their own, it drives more innovation, it drives more development, it drives more tools to be created that then become adoption tools. They then become things that we decide to proactively use in our schools. And so it goes through kind of this cycle in some interesting ways. Excuse me. And I think we're at that place right now with generative AI. So when I say in the title of this talk, generative AI, a problem that solves itself, it's kind of my cutesy way of noting that since ChatGPT really exploded and ushered in this era of generative AI being widespread and accessible, there have been a lot of problems created for us. All the early articles were about how all of us were panicking about our students using AI on their homework and things like that because it was an arrival technology, because it arrived in our students' houses, arrived on their phones, it arrived on their computers, and we were forced to adapt. But now that we've had some time, what we're starting to see is more and more tools coming out that use the same technology to solve the kind of problems that it introduced when it landed everywhere. And those are things that now we can go out and adopt. Part of what I like to look at is just some examples of some of these things that are coming out that are new technologies that are available for us to adopt in different ways. Not because these are the best examples or anything, or because they're paying me, because they're not. But just these are things I've personally seen demonstrated in the past few weeks, or I've personally used that really have exemplified, okay, you know, we can't keep teaching the way we've always taught based on this era of generative AI, but we also aren't forced to figure out how to adjust to it by ourselves. There are new things coming out that will let us create learning experiences that address some of the concerns we have with generative AI, and in fact improve a lot of the learning experiences. First one I'll talk about is something called Canoe. I start with Canoe because it's my personal favorite, just as the one among these that we can all just go out and see. And it's a great app on its own. I like to highlight it more as an exemplar of the kinds of stuff that can be done now. But Canoe is a general knowledge learning app that's available on the Google Play Store and the App Store. And in some ways, it's like Duolingo for general education. But what I really like is it's built with such a nice model of human learning, human understanding, human forgetting in mind that just gives you a whole bunch of modules that you go through. Many of them are generated generatively, so the content is scalable in that way. But it has a model in it of as you answer questions over time, it understands a little bit about how much you're forgetting certain things and how much you're remembering other things. And so if you revisit it every day, it'll give you a set of questions that kind of enforces, okay, here we're going to enforce what you learned yesterday. Here's what we're going to check to see if you still remember what you learned a week ago. We're going to ask you these questions because these are the things you kind of got wrong last time. So clearly you need to revisit these a little bit more often, and really mimics that Leitner system kind of approach to spacing repetition over time for maximum reinforcement. What I like about it is that I think it shows what we could do in learning in general. I'd love to see a version of this that's really meant for anyone, bring your own content version of this, either for students or faculty, so that you can just say, instead of giving you a big test, once every 2 weeks, or once every month, that is going to be a big portion of your grade. And if you don't know things at the time, then you're sunk. Why not have you do a 10-minute quiz every single day? And the things you get wrong today are going to come up again tomorrow, and you keep going until you kind of demonstrate your understanding. Historically, that there's nothing wrong, no reason why we couldn't do that, but it's very difficult to do that scalably and very difficult to do that individually. But a lot of the things in generative AI's new kind of suite of technologies are perfectly suited to that, of generating near variations of common questions and generating some reinforcing content and generating explanations for why things are right and wrong, so that you could, in theory, roll out to students this kind of reinforcement tool to reinforce whatever they're learning in whatever class. That could be done as part of a real curriculum, or it could be something that students just do on their own. We've seen some of the note card tools out there already integrating some of these things, usually more focused on the generating note card kind of approach. I think we'll see a lot more in this area of modeling student understanding and student remembering over time. A second one I've been trying out recently is called Visible AI. Visible AI is a AI augmented assignment composition interface. And so it really looks at this challenge of I probably should have made sure I was allowed to talk about these different companies beforehand. Oh well, they reached out to me to give demos, so I think it's okay. But it really is an AI augmented assignment composition interface addressing the issue of students using AI while writing assignments. And some of it comes in this area of students overusing AI, using it and really pretending to understand something by having the AI generate something. But a lot of it also gets into this area of students not necessarily knowing the proper way to use AI in different areas. And so it's really a way of elevating the interaction with the AI to something we can assess and evaluate and give feedback on. So when students do an essay with Invisible AI, I, as a faculty member, get not only their deliverable, but I also get oh, my GIF isn't playing. There we go. I also get a report to the side of the percentage of content from different sources. I can see the interactions they had with a conversational tool as we go along. And so I can treat all that as a first-class learning object. I can actually, look and say, it looks like you really just kind of borrowed ideas from the AI when you're doing the assignment. Or I can say, hey, it looks like you went through a really nice process of talking with the AI about your ideas, brainstorming, building on what it said, and putting that together. Um, I also love it because it mitigates the old issue of, my computer crashed 5 minutes before the deadline. Well, if it did, then, your work was all saved in the cloud so I can see it up until 5 minutes before the deadline. It's not the PDF at the end isn't the only thing. But the more important thing is that it lets us actually evaluate the process of students creating their work, not just the product, which is something I think is really powerful when we get into to how generative AI can help us and what we can do to kind of mitigate some of its improper use. Um, so yeah. The third one that we've seen recently is called Stukent. Stukent is a virtual simternship platform to let students kind of role play internship like interactions. And so it really applies some of the technologies around generative AI to creating these situations where students will engage in a problem and interact with virtual agents that role play as their supervisor, their client, or a customer, or anything like that. So they can actually act out some of the skills that they're learning. So it doesn't become just rote learning, but it becomes really engaging in the process of demonstrating that they understand, how to engage in these kind of conversations. Really targeted at business, but everything then gets captured and delivered to instructors to be able to evaluate the way students engaged in these processes in a much more authentic kind of way. It reminds me a lot of, virtual reality in education has been under development for many, many years, many of which have been in the area of like EMTs and hospital technicians and surgeons and places like that, where you really can't have authentic practice in the real world. Because ideally, if you're an EMT, you're a surgeon, you're not practicing on the real person. We still call it a practice, but you're not practicing on the real person. You have plenty of experience, but it was hard to get that authentic experience beforehand. Virtual reality tried to deliver that to those fields. This kind of brings that same kind of approach of creating authentic situations to engage in what you're learning authentically, without the stakes and with more repeatability and more reviewability. So you're actually able to go back and say, I did this here. What would have happened if I did this differently? How would this have been more effective in ways you can't do as much in the real world? Socratic Mind is a new tool out of Georgia Tech. So it's created by some students in our program as well as some on-campus students and a professor named Thad Starner here at Tech, which is an AI-driven oral assessment tool, which gives students spoken questions and asks them to respond out loud in a video kind of fashion to the question. Excuse me. And then we'll actually ask them follow-up questions. So it can target specifically the kinds of things that they got right and wrong. It can ask them things like, okay, we asked for these 5 things. Can you tell us more about this one that you didn't quite explain very well? Or can go back and forth in that way. Excuse me. The real benefit to it partially is that it is an assessment approach that is more flexible, more intuitive, more immediate to expressing their understanding, it doesn't it breaks away from the one size fits all approach to assessment in a lot of ways because the follow-up questions a given student will get will be individualized to what they have said previously. It also is as a kind of a more invisible integrity check because we know academic integrity in this kind of area is an important factor. And for me, at least, whenever I'm looking at how to ensure integrity in my assessments, my goal is always to create a cheat, or if you're not trying to get an unfair
Yeah.
advantage, you don't even notice that there's anything there that would make it difficult. So it's invisible to you. That's one thing I like about tools like this is that if you're really engaging in it authentically, you just think you're doing a novel, flexible assessment approach. But if you're trying to have something, trying to have AI or anything else give you an unfair advantage of it, you realize how hard it is and how obvious it is to be sitting there chatting with something off to the side while you're supposed to be engaging in a live dialogue with an AI. So it takes a lot of the strengths of oral assessment, but makes them more flexible and more scalable in the sense of, one of the challenges with things like this is that certain students will have more nervousness, more anxiety about performing in this kind of situation or this kind of environment. But because it's scalable, you can also offer it in a way that says, okay, if you were really anxious that first time, try it again. Get comfortable. Do it a couple times until you really are comfortable with it, so that you're not as intimidated by the interface. And with the questions being flexible and dynamic, you have the room to say, okay, here's a suite of questions asked them. I want you to ask questions about this topic in general. So if they do it more than once, you're able to see, did you just remember what the answers probably should have been from last time, or have you just gotten more comfortable with this area? So we're testing this right now in an undergrad class I have for students um, talking through their coding problems. And it's one thing that I think I could see it replacing a very large amount of assessment that we very often do with something more organic and flexible like this. Um, Another one that's part of Y Combinator's startup funding. It's called GradeWiz. GradeWiz is one of, excuse me, a very large suite of AI augmented grading assistants. Gradescope, for those of you familiar with it, did something very similar to this for not crowdsourcing, but grading in a way that let you very easily percolate out feedback and corrections and changes to a large audience of people. GradeWiz is doing something very similar with AI. Not AI replacing grading necessarily, in my opinion. There's elements of it that are kind of AI replacing grading. In my opinion, though, the value of tools like this is really the AI augmentation of human graders. I teach some very large classes. I have one class that has over 40 teaching assistants, and ensuring consistency across 40 TAs is a very big challenge. But things like this that are able to go in and say, someone is systematically more, stricter on this part, more generous on this part. Someone wrote great feedback that can be applied to all these other students as well. Has the potential to make grading more efficient, which is great for us, but really improve the quality of the feedback and the consistency of the evaluation that students get from these tools because it has access to this very large scale data to look at altogether. And the final one I'll talk about, I think this is the final one I'll talk about, is called EdStim. I think I have to play that too. EdStim, for those who don't know, is a course forum that you use, within your courses and things like that. They added something recently. I don't know how universally available it is, but it's an example of the kind of things that are coming down the pipeline for integrating AI into your forum. Many of you may be familiar with the Jill Watson project that was here at Georgia Tech, which is a very similar kind of thing. My former PhD advisor built in his lab built an AI agent that answers student questions live on a forum to help scale up the ability to provide student support in that way. Generative AI really, and those things were built based on, more simple models, initially at least based on models of just mapping known answers to known questions. And it was still incredibly powerful. The new innovations we have allow these things to be created much more flexibly and to be trained on massive quantities of past forum data so that you're able to share this out to a much larger audience. The demo here is really meant to be more of a teaching assistant in the sense that it's not meant to be something that replaces the interaction that students have with the TA, but it is meant to allow TAs who get a question to be able to say, okay, I know we've answered this question in really great ways many times in the past. I don't want to go back and find those times we've answered this before, give me a summary, give me your suggested answer, and I'll tweak it for this particular student. But draw from this large body of knowledge that you've gained from the fact that we've run this course multiple times and gotten questions like this many times. So it kind of becomes a way of helping a teaching assistant give great feedback, give great answers to various things. Um, so these are all, oh, I do have one more. And this last one I'll mention is called Flint. Flint I love in part because Flint is what my daughter uses for AI. It's a tool that my daughter's school adopted. She's in fourth grade. And there's a part of me that even as someone who is kind of a AI fan. I say fan. I'm also kind of a skeptic about AI in a lot of ways, in the sense of a lot of the things I see going on with AI are solutions looking for problems to solve. But it's been really exciting to see the way her school has been using this in a way that I think is actually a healthy way of approaching it, in a way of this, similar to how you would have students start to use calculators and things like that once they get to a certain level of math. Where Flint's strength is, in my opinion, is really that it's run at the enterprise level by the school. And so teachers are able to say, this is an assignment you're going to do with Flint. It's not a matter of go home and those of you who have ChatGPT Premium get a better experience. Others, those of you who have regular ChatGPT get a kind of inferior experience. Those of you who don't have access to a computer at home, or your parents won't let you get on that site, have nothing. So it takes away some of the inequities there and lets us actually say, okay, this is something that at the enterprise level, we all are giving to our students the same way we give them any other tool. And because they all have the same baseline expectation, we know the kind of learning activity they can go through there. And as an added benefit, similar to Visible AI, their interactions with the AI are delivered to the faculty member so that they can be actually evaluated and treated as a first-class learning object. So it's not just a matter of making sure you weren't just copying everything out of the AI, but it's also a matter of making sure you're learning how to have productive conversations with an AI agent. You're treating learning to collaborate with AI as a first-class learning object. The same way, nowadays we say, okay, this is a lesson we're going to use RTI 83s to learn this topic. Or, you're taking a math test, you complete the non-calculator portion, turn it in, and then get the calculator portion to do the next part. Treating AI very much in the same kind of way. And the fact that it's administered by teachers delivers a lot of power. A lot of the fear I think many teachers have about generative AI is the fact that it's not something we control, it's not something we have any visibility into, and it's not something that our students have fair access to across different students, even if they all have equal access. They don't have the same familiarity with it, and if we're not sure which one they're going to be using, we can't treat it as something to instruct them on. Tools like Flint kind of start to treat it as something that we make available to everyone. And that gives us a lot of power to build activities around it, knowing what kind of tool they have available to them. Again, those are not by all means, that's not like these 7 companies that are doing AI in education. There's 700,000, I'm sure. But those are the ones that I've seen very recently that have really gotten me excited about the possibility of what generative AI can do in education around here. Um, and they really do embody different approaches to this. So we also think of AI use in terms of bottom up and top down, which actually map pretty closely to arrival and adoption, in my opinion. Arrival kind of things here, same kind of thing, are things that individuals need. And so they go out and they find tools that can help them learn a topic that they want. Many of the general purpose things like Copilot and Gemini fall into that area of they're using Gemini on their phones anyway to, do whatever they're asking, replace their Google searches or ask for, what certain images are of, or find certain places. And because they're already using it natively, because they're already using it very organically, it's a very quick kind of jump to say, oh, hey, I bet this could help me with my homework too. I bet this could help me solve this problem, anything like that. These are very individually driven. And at the top down side, you have those kind of things that are things that we as schools adopt and prescribe and assign and get a bunch of data from. So there's things that students are going to bring in that we have to react to. Those are the arrival technologies. There are things that we have the power to adopt and push down to students and say, this is now a learning activity, so I can assess how well you're learning from AI and things like that. And there's a lot of things in the middle. Most of the big companies are going to exist in the middle as well. ChatGPT, for example, is probably the preeminent example of a arrival technology in the sense of, I when talking about the impact of ChatGPT on education, I like to say it's as if it's the mid 1980s, and every student woke up one day with a TI-83 on their nightstand. And how would math teachers adjust to the fact that now they have this ultra powerful technology just available? ChatGPT, grew so fast because it grew on top of technologies that have taken so long to penetrate societal, access and consciousness. But because we were all already using smartphones and computers and things like that, there was a platform for something like that to immediately arrive for everyone all at once. So that's why it's such a key example of an arrival technology. But it is investing more things to partner with universities to do more things to make its power available in a more prescribed fashion. IXL is another example of it's been around for a while, but it uses kind of the same AI models of forgetting curves and things like that that Canoe uses. But individuals can go sign up for it to use as a study aid, but schools can also procure it and assign it for homework and things like that. Exist in this middle ground as well, which in many ways is often the harder place to play, because if you have students who, they used IXL to train themselves and now you're prescribing it to them, you're dealing with students of different levels of familiarity. But there's a lot of room in here for us to be able to say what we're going to adopt and then what we have to adjust to. As far as the barriers, I think that a lot of people are tired of hearing about AI, including me sometimes, because we have come to a point with a lot of these AI kind of technologies where the barriers to using them are no longer technological. Now it's a case of, okay, I want to use that, but how am I going to get through all this, this bureaucracy, this red tape that I would need to use it as a real first-class learning object in my class? Procurement for many of us is exactly that issue. We'll see demos for things and say, oh, I'd love to use that, but I don't have the budget to go out and buy that, and to have my institution procure it creates a lot of challenge because these things can be expensive. Now, and the price model, I think, is also bouncing around so much as well, because the underlying AI resources are changing so fast, and how much they cost. Um, there's a model that Ed uses for its forum bots that I think is a really nice model that I'm hoping more places adopt, which is a bring your own LLM model, which is essentially our tool is built to plug into whatever large language model you want to use. It could be OpenAI, it could be Copilot, it could be Llama, it could be DeepSeek, whatever you want to use. Our tool is built so that you bring your own and you can handle your own procurement of those resources and your own privacy and everything like that. And once you plug it in, it makes it run. So kind of like how you can have your own cloud resources that you install tools on top of. I'm hoping we see more of that, just because it kind of centralizes the procurement of AI resources and then lets that be an engine to power more technologies. These tools do have to be integrated with so many of the things that we use. And so it's one place where we've, I think, really benefited from the fact that the market for learning management systems is a relatively, small, not small market in terms of clients, small market in terms of number of firms, because the places working on these AI tools are able to target the big few. So you know that if you're on Canvas or Blackboard, everyone's building for those as well. So you have that ability. There's still some need for some on-site integration. And so I'm hoping schools will prioritize having their own IT folks able to do this kind of stuff. Even once you make all these things available, though, there's so much barrier to teachers using these in their classes. And from my conversations, the biggest one very often comes from the fact that teachers are very busy people, and we don't always know what the payoff for a certain technology is going to be. And so there has to be some kind of guarantee payoff for some investment of time. Um, so we have to find ways to either give them training, give them the instructional design support, have the central kind of offices that will say, we'll work with you to integrate that. And we have to offer a guarantee. I think that's a challenge both on the industry side and on the university side. Um, is that, if I am presented with a fantastic new technology and I want to integrate it in my class, I need to know that it's still going to be here 2 years from now, because it's not very often not worth investing a whole lot of my time in developing something if I'm not going to be able to take advantage of it and refine and keep building on it for a couple of years. And I also need to know that my school is committed to keeping it around for that amount of time, lest I want to end up in a situation where a month before the semester starts, suddenly that tool I rely on is not going to be there. We actually had a situation like that a couple years ago, not with an AI tool, but with one of our vendors that we built a huge part of our curriculum and our delivery around. And it looked like they were having financial trouble. And we didn't know, are they going to be around a month from now? And if not, what do we do? We have all the agreements for things, but the agreements don't guarantee that these places are going to have, the money to pay their bills and things like that. So So those are things that just are institutional priorities for how we have to adjust to this. The other view of AI in education is learning about AI. And I like to talk about this because there's so many analogies for this kind of thing that we've seen over the years. Search engines, calculators, internet are all things that arrived and forced us to adjust to them. And we see that kind of arrival and adoption curve with all these different technologies as well. That, so to take calculators as an example, when calculators first, I say this, I'm an age where I don't remember what it was like to not have a calculator available for math classes. But I assume there was a time when calculators were starting to become more common things in homes and classrooms. And so teachers had to start adjusting to the fact that, okay, now this is something that we need to know they have access to. So when I'm designing my assignments, I know that that's an arrival technology, that's something I need to account for. But now also we're going to develop textbooks and lessons that are going to assume you have access to this and teach you how to use it effectively. So we've seen all these analogies in a lot of different places. None of these are actually the analogy that I like to use the most for generative AI. I actually like to use the analogy of automobiles. Search engines, calculators, the internet are things that you can still be decently functional, in modern society, not using these things too heavily. Maybe more search engines and calculators than the internet, but you can still be a reasonable participant in a lot of things without knowing much about how these work. Automobiles are something that are so widespread, for better or worse, that it's impossible to be a person in modern society. Even if you're not going to learn to drive, you're against them, anything like that, you will be affected by their existence in ways that go beyond a lot of technologies that you might not choose to embrace. And so I like to think of a spectrum of the AI skills. And I like to bring this up because when we talk about teaching AI skills, there's very often a temptation to focus only on the endpoints of the spectrum. We talk about AI literacy at kind of the K-12 level for kids and folks who need to understand, the power of AI to generate misleading content, the power of AI to target them for advertising, to do everything like that. And that's kind of this coexister area of you're going to live in a world where AI is a thing. And you need to know how to live in a world where AI is a thing. And a lot of the AI literacy efforts really focus on that end of the spectrum of just being in a world that exists. And then on the entire other end of the spectrum, there's the focus on AI education of, giving people a minor in AI, letting them major in AI, letting them get a degree in AI, teaching them how to build AI because supposedly that's where all the jobs are going to be going forward. And it's really this middle area that I think has a lot of potential for us to consider as educators, where we're teaching people how to use it effectively, how to be the AI equivalent of the person in your household that knows how to fix the router when the router goes down. That's the level of skill that I think we, societally, educationally, everything like that, underappreciate how important it's going to be. And it's where really see a lot of AI growth coming out of the IT sector. Is that, just like right now, every firm has an IT team that what the IT team does doesn't differ too heavily from firm to firm. They run the email servers, they keep everything, they provision the accounts, they keep everything up and running that way. And it doesn't matter if you're working in a retailer or an auto manufacturer, a lot of those things are pretty similar across these different domains. AI, I see going in the exact same direction, that there's going to be people who create new AI, sure. And everyone's going to have to coexist in an era where this is a prevalent thing. But so much of the work is going to come from the people who have to take AI that last mile and say, okay, OpenAI is making this kind of thing, this technology available, but someone has to connect that into our system. Someone has to make it so that this is something that can work for our email services, that can work for our kind of knowledge base, our use case. And there'll be a lot of work in that area of users and operators who are going to be people who have to proactively work with it and do a little bit of construction, but not build it from scratch. They're not going to work from OpenAI, but they're going to work in AI at Macy's or somewhere like that. And I think it's also the case that we underappreciate how much there is to do on that far side as well. And this kind of touches on a variety of different things. But when people think about jobs in AI, very often we think of the open AIs, the places like that. They're building the foundational models that are really building the thing. But there's so much work that's going to be done. And this is my bias, I should say. My background is in human-computer interaction, and whenever there's a big jump forward in technology, there's always a long tail of figuring out how to make that technology integrate into people's actual lives. We've seen that with smartphones, that in a lot of ways, a smartphone is not that different now than it was 15 years ago. And yet the way we use them is very different. And part of that has come from a improvement in processing power and speed and everything like that. But a lot of it has come from the fact that people have figured out the use patterns, the ways of interaction that work better with people. And that's not a problem you can just solve once either, because it's also a case that as people get more familiar, you're able to design interactions that you couldn't have designed several years ago because you're now building on that familiarity. And so it's always changing what you're able to create for them. We're going to see the same thing for AI. It's where I say that AI is a solution looking for problems. We know what the strength of it is. We know what it's able to do. What we don't know it yet is how to use that. We don't know the ways that can be applied to real problems that we have in a way and is usable by everyday people. Honestly, I think that's why that's part of why, I'll get to the other reason why in a second. That's part of the reason why I think you do see a lot of people saying they're sick of hearing about AI. Because a lot of what they're hearing about AI is not encouraging. They're hearing about AI like fake people on social media sites pretending to have certain stories and, trying to build community by masquerading as a member of that community and, being someone who can share interesting experiences, but has no authenticity under the hood. Things like that are the places where I think we're really seeing people not like AI because it's not solving a problem that they really have in an immediate way, or it's attempting to solve it superficially, but not solving it deeply. It's not recognizing that the reason why that's a problem is because of an underlying authentic need, not just a need for a message and answer on a certain topic. So depending on where someone falls on the spectrum, for our coexisters, they're going to need to be able to diagnose, to identify AI generated content and to think critically about what they see. The people who are using it on a daily basis are going to need to know some of these use cases, how you actually go about effective prompting, and things like that. The people operating it are going to need to know a little bit more about the strengths and risks and a little bit about the AI architectures. They're going to need to know a little bit so that when something breaks, they're able to diagnose and fix it. They're not going to fix it by going out and, fundamentally fixing ChatGPT itself, but they're able to connect and say, okay, the reason why it's behaving that way is because its input is, being reacted to this way, whatever. They're going to need some kind of level of knowledge like that. We know that the developers are going to need to know the real deep architectural knowledge, but the people who fall into this kind of design side of it, they're going to need to know some of how it works under the hood because they need to understand when you facilitate certain interactions, which way is it likely to go. And they're really the ones designing around usability in terms of security and privacy. They're the ones who understand you can tell your employees all day long not to drop their financial reports into a AI system that's just going to suck it up and use it for training data for somebody else. But if it's really easy to do it and it's going to make their life easier, they'll make their job easier and get them better results faster, they're probably still going to do it. And so these designers have to understand how you create things that are usable, that accomplish the goals while still preserving some of this privacy. And there's so much research to do. For us researchers, and AI is kind of placed in history. It's a terrifying, exciting time to look at how it's impacting the development of society. I'll close, I alluded to this a bit. I close with two warnings that I say AI in business, but it's also AI in academia. It's AI in everything, I think, which is in this rush to embrace AI, there's two big potential pitfalls that I see. Um, we're already starting to see a decent pullback, a decent pushback from people who just are over it, who don't want anything to do with it. They think it's bad. They think it's, awful in a lot of different ways. And so they just won't use anything that has to do with it. Um, when we really actively embrace some of these things, we do risk alienating certain groups of people in ways that we may not have visibility into because they're not there to be seen. They're looking at it and saying, I don't want to go to a school. I don't want to take a class that is going to require me to interact in that way because I have these hangups about it. And it's something we have to be aware of, something we have to keep an eye on. I'm not saying it's something that should, stop us from ever embracing these kind of things. But it is something to be aware of, is aware of the way society as a whole is viewing the role of these kind of tools. When AI for teaching assistants, for example, is seen as a way of getting students better feedback, better answers to their questions faster, then it, has a positive connotation. If it's seen as allowing us to teach classes that are ever bigger without hiring more people or by, with firing teaching assistants because we now have AI, that's a negative view of it. And one that I don't think is going to capture the strength of these tools but in ways that we might not be aware that people are pulling back from us until it's too late, until we have the reputation of being a very AI first, AI reliant endeavor. And the other that's similar is this increasing societal politicization of AI, which happens with all technologies. To be clear, this is not specific to AI. Every technology has its own kind of political connotation to it. And there will be places where there are those who think we shouldn't use this kind of thing, not because it's being used in ways that we don't like, but because it fundamentally represents something that we don't, is a direction we don't think society should go in. What's fascinating about these, and the reason I give these as warnings now, is because these things can change faster than we can change. We can see tools, we can see initiatives take on these connotations long after we've started them. And we can wake up one day and realize this thing that was perfectly fine to do 3 years ago, now everyone thinks this means we're awful people who are doing this kind of, we're taking advantage of creators' intellectual property, we're, getting rid of teaching assistants, anything like that. And I'm not saying anything positive or negative about that connotation, but it is something we have to be aware of. If we have to be ready to answer the questions about what it means that we're using these technologies long after we've started using them, because they can take on these views after we've begun really relying on them. So um, that is all I got. I got to stay closer to my time than I was afraid of. So my shameless plugs, if you want to see more of what I do, my website is over there. Got a couple books on AI and education if you want to see those. Most of my focus is on learning at scale, and AI is one avenue to that, but it's not the only one. In my program, for example, we hire 600 teaching assistants every semester, and that's how we reach scale. So it's not really AI reliant in that way. Um, uh, the program I run is linked over there as well, just for more about that. And I'm always here on email. About 80% of my job is checking and responding to email. So feel free to email me. I also have a feedback form over there on the right that I put out because I always want to get feedback on these talks. It's purely anonymous. So if you have something that you want to share, that you noticed a typo, or you noticed that I gave some inaccurate information, or you have a tool you want to suggest that you're actually the founder of, but you want me to include it in for each presentation, but you don't want to sound self-promotional, feel free to use that form to give me any feedback. And yeah, that's all I've got. I haven't seen any questions come in the chat, so I'm open to anyone who has any to bring up now, or yeah.
Uh, Hi. Well, I'm back here now. Well, a really interesting and thought-provoking talk. Thanks, David. And I can already see there's a number of people are expressing their appreciation as well. So we have, let's see. So to the audience, please post your questions here. We already have one question that I'm going to read out. So the question is, do you know of any legislation on the way to help protect people from having the data and content they upload taken without consent and used for training generative AI?
Yeah, I know that Europe has been kind of forward thinking on that, kind of mimicking. I mean, many of the provisions of GDPR honestly were already in the situation where they were protecting against a lot of these kind of things when well used. I think GDPR and a lot of those restrictions run into the same kind of usability things of, so many of these initiatives are meant to protect user data and are very well intentioned. In practice, what they mean is I have to click accept on every website I go to the first time. And as long as that's what people are actually doing with it, it's not serving its purpose. I think there's a lot more we can do on the user interface design side of things to create, more scalable ways to, to preserve that privacy. I really do think, though, this is a place where, as often happens with technology, we're forced to apply old laws to things they were never written to cover. That the laws around intellectual property and everything like that, they were never written to cover the idea of a system sucking up all this data. Because there likely was not something particularly illegal about, yeah, I'm sure the court cases will decide this, but it's entirely possible there's nothing illegal about the way this was all done because it, mimics the way people were doing this kind of stuff. Um, I do think it's a case of, going forward, the protections are going to be interesting just because so much of the power of these kind of tools was built on the fact that there was such a large body of information there before. And it was authentic information. It was writing we knew came from humans because there was no AI at the time. Unless it's developed time travel and travel back, which, would be fun. Um, but so much of it was built on that notion. And now we have this issue of issues around model collapse that are this idea that as we see more and more content generated that may or may not be AI, or maybe AI generated but not forthcoming about it, these models are going to get worse in a lot of ways because they're going to be re-ingesting what they themselves produce, knowingly or unknowingly. And that's going to have some negative effects on how much they can keep up and how much they can continue to improve. I've thought that pre-generative AI data sets are going to become kind of like pre-World War II steel in the sense of, for those who don't know, pre-World War II steel, before nuclear bomb tests, the steel would lack certain imperfections that I'm already over my head about material science to really talk about. But there is a reason why pre-World War II steel is a much needed commodity because it doesn't have some of the information that came from nuclear tests. I think we'll see the same kind of thing with pre-generated AI data sets that are guaranteed to not have any AI generated content will become more and more valuable because if they have significant elements of that content, they're not going to be useful for their intended purpose. Um, so I think that it's going to be interesting to see. We're also going to be in an area where individuals, we may not want our content sucked up to AI. But others are going to specifically want it because AI is going to become the new search engine, and already in some ways has become that. And so we'll be in a situation where if you, as New York Post, New York Times, whatever newspaper, don't want your content to be sucked up by AI, then suddenly it doesn't mean that your content doesn't get used to train AI. It just means that when someone goes and asks ChatGPT, "Hey, find me recent news articles about this topic," it doesn't send them your way anymore. So this is all talking around the question a little bit. I think it's going to be a challenge in a lot of ways, just because so much of what we do is built on putting information out there and what it's used for after that, especially given the fact that so many of the platforms we're using to share it are the ones doing some of this development. Um, I know there's laws coming out, especially out of Europe, about it. I'm dubious as to how effective they'll even be because I think they may fall into that same kind of area of everyone just defaults to saying accept because that's what you have to do to access the site. So,
And most likely, I'll just add a little bit of thought to that. That most likely, especially in the area of things like intellectual property and copyright, those kind of things, laws will have to be probably revised and in this whole context, that is, who owns what.
what do you mean
Okay.
so? Yeah.
Another question. This one is from Grace Clark. So whenever people have, given their names, I will recognize them. So Grace's question is, what are your thoughts on energy consumption due to AI?
I think that I have multiple different thoughts. One is that I think we are in this kind of early phase where, so many efficiency gains to new technology. There's that big steep drop off of you build it first place and the drop off happens pretty steeply. So I think we'll see some really big strides forward in energy efficiency going forward. I also think that, we've so much of the dialogue around AI has focused on this idea that we're all going to have someone, artificial general intelligence is going to mean we're all going to have someone as smart as us as an assistant. It's going to be that accessible. And I don't think that's actually the case. I think what we're going to see, and I like the analogy of telescopes for this. I predict, and feel free to, since this is recorded, feel free to throw this back in my face 10 years from now if I'm wrong, or 10 months from now, because that would mean I'm really wrong. Um, is that we'll see something more like how telescopes have developed, which is anyone can have, a cheap telescope in their backyard, go look at it. But if you want to do real research, real authentic stuff, you need to be the government running the $100 million James Webb Space Telescope. You need the really big technology. You can do things kind of in a hobby kind of way. They're more local. Um, but there's going to be, I think there'll be continue to be this divide between the really, really super powerful stuff that really needs more central control administration development and the stuff that, is made available to people more directly. Um, that latter side is where I see a lot of these jumps forward being possible as you know, we're still relatively young in this, so we'll find things that make things much more efficient to run. And the really demanding stuff, I think, will stay in this area of a smaller number of major AI clusters doing the real stuff, the real authentic stuff that you need the enormous power and the enormous funding um, to be able to do. at least that's my expectation. So I'm hoping we see a pretty steep drop off in its energy consumption needs. Especially actually with what Rajiv said about the more small models. I think we'll also see the nice thing about the energy consumption is that there is kind of a market effect there. There is a market reason to want things to be more energy efficient because it will make them cheaper and things like that. And so we'll also see more areas of, you don't need the top of the line GPT like 8.0 at that point or whatever the most sophisticated one is to give students individual feedback on their assignment. And so we'll see that also of, if I can build something that's really targeted, it's much more energy efficient and saves both energy and money going forward.
Okay, so another question is, what are your thoughts on students using AI to write papers and instructors using AI detection tools?
I think that really is where I like a lot of the technologies that I previewed here because it goes back to my opinion on. So I think on any assessment, there is always a gap between the grade, for lack of a better term, the student earns and their actual underlying understanding. And that the gap can be on either side and for different reasons. So for example, testing anxiety is a big reason why students' grades may not accurately reflect their understanding because they understood it better, but they just couldn't thrive in that environment. Using AI to write papers can be the opposite side. If it looks like they had A-level knowledge because the AI wrote a great paper, but really they have D-level knowledge. Like a lot of the kind of tools like Socratic Mind, because what they really do is they move the assessment from assessing a product to assessing a process. And the process is much harder to use AI as a replacement for what you actually understand. Uh, and this isn't a new idea. Math the same kind of way. The classic idea in math of, especially on your homework, show your work as a way of me knowing you weren't just using your calculator to get all the answers, is the same kind of idea. It was a way of visualizing the process by which you got to your answer instead of just the product. So I think that's where we have to have things focus. We have to have things that focus on evaluating the process and giving feedback on the process. It's also a big opportunity to be able to get a student's essay and not just give them feedback on the essay that was produced, but give them feedback on their process of creating the essay. To be able to say, hey, I looked at your revision history. I looked at the way you created this. You started on the first sentence, wrote straight through to the end and never revised a single thing. That's not an efficient way, to write. Versus somebody else where you say, okay, great. You start with an outline and you drill down on this, you drill down on this. I can see how your understanding evolved in this way. And those are things that if you try to really over rely on AI in those areas, you're going to struggle to make it look like you're doing it authentically. Um, so I think that's the direction that those things are going to have to go. The AI writing detectors just are not. We're actually working on some projects in that area. That I think there's ways we can improve that process, but it's not improve at the level of being able to accuse a student of using AI and giving them a zero just because clearly used AI on this. With some exceptions, there are situations I've had where the student left the language of their prompt in their essay. It's like, yes, if you left the language of the prompt in the essay, I'm going to give you a zero for copying from AI because clearly you copied from AI. But more often it's a case of, this feels like it was AI generated. And so I think that those are places also where we can start to say, okay, if an essay feels AI generated, whether or not you actually used AI, if it's something that AI could have done, it's probably not the level of understanding I wanted you to have. Either it's a badly written assignment, in which case I need to revise it so it's not something AI can do very well at, or I can say, okay, you're really not doing something more than what AI could have done. So even if you didn't use AI, your understanding is not as deep as I would like it, to be. So I think we can do some more in that area of kind of understanding what AI's answers to things are going to be and encouraging a deeper level of thinking, not just slapping them on the wrist
Yeah,
for copying from AI.
right. So, David, since we only have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to, and there are still 11 questions. I just picked the one that I think is probably has to be the last question, which is, what are your views about who gets to decide the ethical usage and misuse of AI within academia? What would be a best case scenario that truly reflect consensus of the community?
Uh,
And you have 2 minutes to answer this
yes, I was about to
question, not
say, a
not
nice
two
question to have.
hours.
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, which we don't live in, um, we would have been able to vet a lot of these things in advance. We would have been able to say, OpenAI has developed ChatGPT. Is this something we want everyone to be able to just sign on and use just like that? Um, I've compared AI and education of AI to a lot of things, but some of the more fun things, but they have some really, significant influences are you can compare it to things like alcohol as well. It's very similar in the sense of maybe it can have healthy ways to be used, maybe it can have ways to be abused. Maybe it's very often the case you don't want people under a certain age using it because they aren't really equipped yet to understand the trade-offs and everything that they're negotiating there. So there's a lot of things like that that I think we will have to struggle with. But for everything like this, it's always been a case, I think, that it penetrates society before we get to go back and decide how we should have let it get out. And for better or worse, that just tends to be how these things tend to go. And so I don't know if anyone really gets to decide right now, only because there's the utilitarian kind of view of, I'm ethically against it, and so I'm not going to use it, and so I'm going to oppose it. But if I'm then not able to compete, not able to hold down a job because I refuse to use that technology, is that the right stand to take? I think that's an individual stand to take. I think there is an individual element of understanding where these things came from. And maybe that's another weird analogy, is it's worth comparing to vegetarianism of, there's arguments about being a vegetarian, there's arguments about being a vegan, there's arguments about being, a carnivore. And they come from, where we came from as a species and what the current state of things are. And do you differentiate farming in this way from farming in that way? There's so many things that go into it that I think really our focus has to be on making sure people understand the impacts of what they're deciding, making sure people understand that AI system that is generating fantastic looking artwork. The reason it is because it was trained on fantastic artwork from a whole bunch of people who weren't compensated for the art that went into training it. And we can mince words about whether it was legal or not to develop that, but it's probably not going to go away just because a court case tomorrow says it wasn't allowed to be trained the way it was. And so a lot of it just gets into this area of how do you justify using it for this different use case? A colleague of mine mentioned the idea of he used it for generating a birthday card. And the rationale was he going to go out and pay a designer $100 to write a custom birthday card? No. So it didn't take away from anybody. But those are all kind of slippery slope arguments because, you can draw very clear extremes on that. But there's going to be a point where, maybe I would have, but it's a little bit easier, so I'll go. So I think that's where it really is this AI literacy angle. It's making sure people are aware that this is not just a magical tool that you use and did not, draw from any human effort and does not draw any electricity or anything like that. Here are the societal impacts of its existence, and you can decide for yourself what trade-offs are worth it. And you can work towards making sure that going forward, the trade-offs get better and better. That going forward, it's more and more fair, more and more equitable in how it shares credit and shares the not the revenue, but shares the benefits of its existence, as opposed to just continuing to suck away from individual creativity and everything like that. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We are 3 minutes over time, so I guess we will not ask any more questions. Just a few sort of logistics end notes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to Professor David Joyner, and of course to our technical staff for managing everything smoothly. And also this whole AI, DSI's AI in higher education webinar. The next one is going to be the AI monoculture, preserving human diversity in the age of AI. And this is going to be presented by Professor Sonia Schmer-Galunder from the University of Florida. And in fact, I'm actually going to post this information as well as there's a link that you can use for registering. I'm going to post that right now in the chat. So you can look at that, okay? And yeah, I guess Amanda posted that as well. Thank you, Amanda. And again, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week. And thank you to our speakers. So once more, maybe you can show some appreciation to our speaker. And thank you, everyone.